Hi everyone, thank you for coming to this session. My name is Stefan Hoefnagels and I'm a user experience designer in Microsoft Windows. And today I'm representing the very talented Windows 7 desktop experience team. Now before we get started, I realized that to most of you my name probably sounds like a bunch of gibberish, and that's no surprise since it's actually a Dutch name. However, it does mean something. It's not something cool like a galloping horse on a plane or anything cool like that, but it does have something to do with horses. It's not even the horseshoe. That would still be way too logical. No, it's actually the nails that go into the horseshoe. So now you know Hoefnagels is horseshoe nails. Also, I want to give you guys a heads up. I'm not going to be talking about web stuff. I'm actually going to be talking about the Windows desktop experience, which is basically, the stuff that you see here. The taskbar is a very big part of it, the start menu, but also the windows themselves and the way you can put windows on the screen. Now, you're looking at the Windows Vista desktop experience, and this is how we evolved it in Windows 7. How many of you are actually using or have used Windows 7? Wow, that's a good number, great. So what I'm going to be talking about today is basically the story of how we got from the Windows Vista desktop experience to the Windows 7 desktop experience. And I'll share with you basically the evolution of the design through a lot of sketches and a lot of prototypes. And you'll be seeing today literally stuff that no one outside of Microsoft has ever seen before. We typically don't show this kind of stuff. And through these stories, of some of these things that we did, I'll touch on some of the challenges that we had in the process. I'll touch on some of the solutions that we came up with. And most importantly, I'll also share with you the lessons that we learned in this process. And you might be able to use them in your design process as well. So hopefully it should be fun. But before we get started, before we look forward, I always think it makes sense to look back and basically see where we came from. Now, one of the interesting things about working on Windows is Windows is old. It's actually very old. Windows is from 1985. This is what we all went to see in the movies in 1985, Back to the Future. This is not even Back to the Future 2 or Back to the Future 3. No, this is actually the original Back to the Future, right? And this is what we all watched on TV, Cosby Show. And what did we all listen to in 1985? Anybody remember that? Careless Whispers by Wham. So picture this. It's 1985. We've got a couple of developers in Redmond sitting in their offices. They're listening to the Careless Whispers. And they're coding up some stuff, right? And what are they coding up? They're actually coding up... sorry about that. They're not coding up the Cosby Show. They're actually coding up Windows 1. Well, let's say goodbye to Wham for a second. So look at that, Windows 1 from 1985. And what are those big icons at the bottom of the screen? Is that the Apple dock? No, it's actually not the Apple dock. This predates the Apple dock by 15 years. This even predates the Next Step OS, upon which the dock was based, by 2 years. And for all your OS historians in the audience, it actually predates the Arthur OS by 2 years as well. So these icons that actually represent Windows running on the desktop are arguably the industry's first stab at a taskbar-like UI. So Windows 1. So let's fast forward a little bit, 5 years. We're now in 1990. Here's Windows 3. The interesting thing is in Windows 3 we kind of went away from the taskbar. So now you can see we have overlapping windows, but Windows all of a sudden minimized to the desktop. Windows 95, I'm sure some of you will still remember it. We introduced a whole bunch of new features in Windows 95, the start menu, and we also did some tweaks in it. This is when we really introduced the very first taskbar. You can see a start button there, a notification area, a switching area. And you can see a quick launch as well, right next to the start button. Now I cheated a little bit. This screenshot is actually from 1997. It's not from 1995. Quick Launch was introduced with IE4, and basically it was our attempt to give you one-click launching access to all the programs that you use all the time. Now, Windows XP, we went away from the Quick Launch again. You can see the Quick Launch is turned off by default. People could still turn it on. We decided to turn it off by default. And we did some other stuff. For instance, in the Start menu, we created an MFU list, making it very easy to launch all your programs. And this is where we are today, Windows Vista. A lot of changes we did in Windows Vista. One of them, we brought back the Quick Launch. You can see it back again on the taskbar. And also, we introduced search in the Start menu, for instance. Another attempt is to make it very fast to get to the programs that you want to use. Now, this is basically where we were at the beginning of our design process. So let's take a pause here and look at Windows Vista. What we did is we sat back, we looked at the Windows Vista, and we're like, what are some of the areas of improvement that we see in the desktop experience? Any of you guys read that sticky note up there? How many Outlook icons do you see? Anybody want to guess? 6? No, it's more than 6, actually. 9? No, it's less than 9. No, it's not 7. 8. Excellent. Great. My God, you guys are awesome. So there's, and many of these icons that you see on your desktop, they actually do the same thing. They allow you to launch Outlook. But some of them do some different stuff. So let's look at one set of these Outlook icons. So you're seeing 4 here, right? Now, this guy here, what does this guy do? It allows me to launch Outlook. This guy, pretty straightforward, allows me to switch to Outlook. Now, these icons are trying to tell me, you got some new email, and maybe it will give me some status about the Exchange server. And then here, I installed a gadget, and it keeps me up to date about my upcoming appointments. Now, as you can see, a complicated app like Outlook that does a lot of different things is sort of spread out all over my desktop, right? Is that what we want? I don't know, maybe not. Now, this slide is from our planning team. They looked at 300 volunteers that participated in the study, and they shared with us their desktops. And we were very interested to learn, how do they arrange their desktops? How do they personalize their desktops? And this is just a sample of these 300 people's taskbars. So what do you notice when you look at this slide here? It's just a lot of stuff going on, right? It's very busy. Let's just look at one part of one taskbar on this slide. Now, what is this? Do we really need all these icons here in the system tray? Right? Do we even know, right, what is the difference between this green cog circle here and then there's another green circle here? I mean, what do these things even mean? And likely the chances are I didn't even put those icons there. They kind of just showed up, right? Just a lot of noise going on. Let's look at another taskbar from that earlier shot. What's wrong with this picture? Everything overflows. Everything overflows. Look at that. You got Quick Launch here, but everything doesn't fit, so there's a little chevron there. We got text on this button here. It says ... so clearly the text didn't fit on the button. Here we got ... and an arrow, so meaning the text didn't fit on the button, and there's even more buttons than fit on this taskbar. And then we've got the tray here. Look at that. There's a lot of icons here already, but apparently there's even more because this little chevron is indicating there's more stuff even hidden. So it just feels like there's just a lot of stuff crammed in like a very, very space-constrained UI, right? There are some other areas for improvement. Even when your taskbar is not, in a crazy state like that we showed earlier, you got a pretty quiet taskbar here. Sometimes you're not exactly sure you're switching to the right window, right? In this scenario here, which one is the right notepad? The only way I can find out is actually clicking on those things and then trying it out. It's kind of trial and error. Maybe we can improve this. Or let's look at the windows. You ever do kind of a drag and drop operation from one window to the other? Sort of a hassle, right? You got to make sure that the window is positioned in the right way and that you can still select all the files, but then at the same time you got to make sure ahead of time that the other window is sort of positioned sort of off the side so that there's still enough visible that I can actually grab those files and drag it over. So I'm resizing my windows, I'm putting them on certain positions on the screen. There's just a lot of mouse movement, a lot of fiddling, a lot of messing around, a lot of acrobatics going on. It's such a simple operation as drag and drop. So reviewing, what were some of the areas for improvement that we saw early on in the Vista design process? App functionality is scattered. This was the Outlook example I showed you guys, where one app is just scattered all across the user's desktop. There's too much noise, all these tray icons, all this text that doesn't fit. There's a lot of stuff going on. Switching windows sometimes can be error prone. We just don't give you the right information to confidently switch to the right window. And finally, arranging windows involves acrobatics. It's not as simple as it should be. Now, the way that we think about the desktop experience is we don't think the desktop experience is a destination. We think people care about their documents, they care about their web pages. Those are the things that you want to get to. And the desktop experience to us is basically the thing that allows you to get to those web pages and documents in the fastest possible way. So what we wanted to do is really put all the lights on green and make sure you can get to your destination as fast as possible. So don't get me wrong, we just looked at Vista. I don't think the desktop experience in Windows Vista is horribly broken. Basically what we wanted to do is just look at all these little things that exist that kind of slow you down, and basically address all those and evolve an already good system to make it even easier and faster to get to your destinations. So how did we articulate that in our goals? These are the goals we early on articulated for the desktop experience. Things you use all the time are at your fingertips. We want the stuff that you use all the time to be easy to get to. Manage your windows with confidence. This is about switching to the right window and putting windows easily where you want them. You are in control. If you're putting an icon somewhere on the taskbar, you have kind of have to be the person that puts it there. It's not that nice if all of a sudden these icons just show up, right? And the final one is a very important one as well. This one is about the look and feel. We're kind of going for this very efficient, fast system, and we wanted our look and feel to really reflect that efficiency, to really feel fast and look fast as well. So a very clean and lightweight emphasis on all of our visuals and animations. So with that, for those of you that haven't used the Windows 7 beta yet, I'll just give you a 5-minute demo of the Windows 7 desktop experience. Now, the first thing you'll notice on the Windows 7 desktop is a changed taskbar. So it's not, it's bigger, but it's not twice bigger. It's actually only 10 pixels taller. And that gives us larger icons, which are easier to recognize and also easier to click. Moreover, it's just very simple for me to personalize that bar to my liking. I can go to the Start menu, for instance, grab an application, and just drag it onto the taskbar. And this way I can make the taskbar really reflect all of the applications that I use all the time. And finally, I can even grab my applications and just move them in the spot where I want them to be. Right? This has been the #1 feature request actually of the taskbar that we heard. So let's see how this thing works. Just like in Vista and previous versions of Windows, I can go to an icon here. Let's go to Notepad, and I can simply click it to launch Notepad. Right? Very straightforward. The only difference that you're seeing here is Notepad didn't open up in a different place. No, it actually opened up exactly in the same place. We want you to have basically one place per application to have all your functionality that's related to an app, all in one button. Now, when I click it again, it minimizes just like previous versions of Windows. And then when I move my mouse over it, we show you a thumbnail. Right? This is something that we introduced in Vista, and we actually know that people really like thumbnails because it gives them, most of the time, a pretty accurate preview of their window. One interesting thing about the thumbnails, though, is that in our usability labs, we always found that people like thumbnails so much that they want to click on it. You know, in Vista, you would hover over a button, it would show you the thumbnail, and then you move your mouse to the thumbnail, and the thumbnail will go away, right? So there was always a little bit of disappointment in our usability participants where they're like, that's the window I want, let me click on it. Oh no, now it's gone. So finally, in Windows 7 we said, well, let's just make the thumbnails clickable, right? So I can just go up here, click it, and just switch to that window. Let's open a couple more windows. Some Explorer windows right here. Make this sort of a realistic setup. You know, one thing you noticed is that I now have got multiple Explorer windows open up, and yet there is still only one Explorer button on the taskbar. So we're really grouping, no matter how many windows you have, we're really bringing these all together in a single button, one place to go on your taskbar. Now, when you hover over, of course, we're going to show you all of the thumbnails, right? And we show them side by side, making it just very easy for you to compare, you know, the differences between these windows for each application. Now, sometimes we realize, you know, this is a good example of some pretty good thumbnails. One has some pictures in it. One just looks maybe like a more regular Explorer window. But sometimes, you know, maybe when you're opening up email messages or just a bunch of list views with details view, it just all looks sort of like white squares, right? So you might need, you know, the thumbnails necessarily don't provide you all the right information to switch to the right window. So for that, we introduced a feature called Arrow Peek. When I don't have enough information to switch to the right window based on the thumbnails, I simply move my mouse over the thumbnail, and we give you a 100% preview of the window that you want to switch to. So notice I haven't clicked at all, I haven't switched at all. This is all just preview. Seeing the real window at 100% content, the right size, the right place on the desktop. And we know that people actually love to close windows, you know. People love to open a lot of windows, people love to close windows too. So we made that really easy as well. When I move over the thumbnail, you can see a little close blocks appearing, and I can just right here from this thumbnail preview close my window. Let's look at Internet Explorer. Now, Internet Explorer and many other browsers have tabs, and we know many users really like to use tabs. So let's open a tab. So, and now just like we did for those multiple Explorer windows, in Internet Explorer or any other browser with tabs, when you hover over your button here, we show you basically your web pages. It doesn't matter if it's a window or if it's tab, we just show all of them to you. Just making it really easy to get to the web page that you want. You know, the web page is the thing that you care about. You know, and notice when the experience of just trying to switch to the right window, we focused a lot on just making it very elegant. So when I scrub the taskbar, you can see this preview just following me around and just morphing to show me all of these different thumbnails. And similarly, when I just move up here and try to preview all of my windows, there's just a very smooth experience that happens, allowing me to preview those windows. One thing that you might have noticed as well is that the icons sort of light up when I move my mouse over there. That's a very deliberate design thing that we did as well. You know, we think the taskbar shouldn't be the star of the show. We think the icons on the taskbar should be the star of the show, right? Those are the things that you care about. So we made sure that really the icons look great. They light up. Their color is reflected in our Hover UI. Really refining that experience that way. Now I talked to you about, you know, how to open applications, but wouldn't it be good if instead of just opening blank windows, I could open directly, you know, the files that I really care about? So for that, we introduced a feature called jump lists. So when I actually right-click on any application here on the taskbar, we show you a jump list, and it allows you to directly jump to those web pages or those documents that you care about. And it doesn't even matter, you know, the application doesn't even need to be running. Word here is not running. I right-click on it, allows me to directly jump to those documents that I was working on. So let's go back to the Explorer windows. You remember that scenario I was talking about earlier about dragging and dropping between two different windows? So let's open up another one here. We introduced a feature called Arrow Snap that just makes it much easier to accomplish that scenario. I can now grab a window, move it to the side, put it there, grab this window, move my cursor to the side, put it there, and now in two very, very easy, simple gestures, I just have two side-by-side windows, making it easy to drag and drop files between them or compare content. And I can also just pull them back very easily as soon as I'm done. And then finally, throughout this demo, I open a whole bunch of windows. Imagine you just want to focus on one window. Well, for that, we introduced a feature called Arrow Shake. Simply grab a window, shake it, allows me to really focus on that window by itself. Once I'm done with this window, I might want to shake it again, bring it back, shake it again. I could do this all day. So that's Arrow Shake. So you've seen our history, our areas of improvement that we identified, and our goals. And I showed you our final design as well, or at least the beta design of Windows 7. So let's talk about our design process. How do we evolve our UI? So what I want to do is basically share an impression of the process through several case studies of design iterations. And throughout, I'll touch on some of the challenges, some of the solutions, and also some of the lessons learned, again, that you might be able to use in your design process as well. To start, I want to give you guys a sense of the timeline and the scale of our process. So we started in early 2007. It's a little over 2 years ago. So, 2-year process. And just to give you an impression of the size of the team, a feature area such as the taskbar, there's about a dozen people working on that. And it's a very multidisciplinary team. So we've got developers in the team, we've got testers in the team, we've got program managers, user research is represented, and design as well. And then the overall desktop experience, probably around 30 people that work on that. And in this process, this 2-year process, we generated a whole bunch of content, a whole volume of stuff. And normally we don't share this, but I'll show you some of the the very early sketches of the design process. Here you've got some very interesting sketches from an early brainstorm. This one was around the look and the feel, and you can see we're pretty crazy here, right? Like there's a we're talking about emotions here, shy and bold, and then somehow that's represented as a closed flower and an open flower. We're talking about sapphire highlights. There's just this is a pretty kind of wacky brainstorm that we had early on about the look and feel. Now, the important thing is about this brainstorm, this is not just design going crazy, right? I think most designers are pretty comfortable, going kind of crazy with these kind of brainstorms. Now, we made sure that throughout our process it was very, very multidisciplinary and very collaborative. So this brainstorm, for instance, all the disciplines were involved. Developers, program management, user research, and everybody's coming up with those crazy ideas, right? And that was one of the great things, I think, about our process. Now, of course, we didn't only do these, kind of weird brainstorms. We did a lot of just more functional sketches as well. Actually, we did a lot of low fidelity. This is just a sample of some of the sketches that we did, but we did, I think we did about 400 of these, so quite a lot. And these are very early in the process. So, for instance, here you can actually see the very first sketch for the grouped thumbnail feature that I showed you earlier. Another interesting thing that we experimented in terms of sketching is you'll notice that some of these sketches are animating. This guy here, they're actually little animated sketches. So this was this is the way that we sort of early on in the process, through sketches, explore some of the transitions in the experience, and not just the static screenshots. And we would sketch pretty much on anything that's available. So we would have, of course, a whole bunch on the whiteboard, right? All this stuff is, gone now. And we would use our sketch pads and so on and so forth. Just a lot of content that's generated. And we didn't, of course, even though we did a lot of low fidelity, that's not the only tool that we used. We did a lot of high fidelity as well, and just exploring different ways of laying out different controls or different types of user flows. So a lot of high fidelity. So what you just saw is basically 150 sketches or high fidelity comps that we did throughout the process, all the way from the beginning, all the way to the end. So with all this volume of explorations, how do we stay on track? How do we make sure that we don't kind of lose our path and get lost? And also with all these different disciplines represented, how do we make sure that we deliver a focused design while still having multiple fingerprints represented on it? So that is definitely something that we strive for. Now for us, the UX principles were really important for that aspect of the process. So what are UX principles? Earlier I shared with you guys the goals that we articulated. And the goals is sort of like the mountain peak on this image here. And we kind of have this image in our mind. This is the thing that we want to get to. Very abstractly, we kind of know what we want to get to. And we're kind of in the village there, but what is the best path to get there? The UX principles are basically a way for us to kind of make sure that we stay on track and we find kind of an efficient path to get to our goal, that mountain peak. We don't do a left turn in the forest or something like that, right? So these are our UX principles that we used for Windows 7. I'm not going to speak to them all here now. Because I think actually each project probably needs its own principles based on the problem that you're solving or the context of the specific project. But what is important is the fact that you have principles, and to really allow you to stay focused in a multidisciplinary team. And for principles to be successful, they kind of have to be internalized by the entire team. And one way that we did that is simply print them out, right? People could put them in their offices. And now it's just one glance away, easy for me to be reminded about my principles. Some people maybe not as organized, maybe a little bit more clutter, but they'll be able to find it, right? When I took this picture, they were able to dig it up. So it's very important to just, for the whole team to be aware of the design principles. Another area that another way that we made sure that we didn't get lost is user data. In Windows Vista, 11 million people have opted in to anonymously share user data with us, which is great. We got data for almost 400 million sessions, and this represents 200 countries and regions around the world. And this really sets boundaries on our design process. It gives us some insight as to what are the users that we're designing for. I'll give you an example. This was a really interesting graph for us to see. How many windows did people have open on their desktops? As you can see from this graph, 90% of sessions have actually between 0 and 14 windows open, right? And that's a really interesting data point for us. It really allows us to set some boundaries around the design and really know our customer and know who we're designing for. So with that, let's look at some specific examples of some design iterations that we did. I got 3 of them for you. One is called Bat Signal. It's all about window switching. One we call the Nub. It's all about showing jump lists. And Arrow Shake, which is, of course, about shaking a window. Let's look at Bat Signal first. Remember our goals? This one is all about just this goal, managing your windows with confidence. And actually more specific than that, switching to the right window quickly. Now let's look at the taskbar for a second, the Vista taskbar. I looked at it one way, the taskbar is simply a remote control to get to your windows, right? And we surface a bunch of cues to help you find the right window. We give you a little icon here, right? We give you some text, we give you a thumbnail, we give you some more text. And of course the window itself has a bunch of cues as well. It has 100% content and a certain size and position on the screen. Now early on what we wanted to do is basically see if we could address this question. Could we just make it easier to find the right window? Our first try was actually a very, very early prototype. This is late 2006. And this is a real code prototype that was done by one of our developers. And this is it. So don't look at this stuff here. This is basically an artifact of the prototype. This is still the Vista taskbar running here. But this is basically the prototype running in the Vista taskbar. And what we did here is we said, you know, what if we just shuffle some of that information around, and instead of putting an icon and text on the top level, what if we put the thumbnails top level? You know, how is that going to work? And that sounded kind of interesting, you know, because we know that people like the thumbnails. But we realized after doing this prototype, those thumbnails just become sort of small, right? And most of the time they just turn into these white squares, and they don't actually help me that much in trying to find the right window. So we had to do another try. And this try we called Bat Signal. This was done in February 2007, so a few months after. And you can see the Bat Signal prototype actually running here in the system tray. So again, this was a prototype. I think it was actually an idea by one of our developers, and also a prototype by one of our developers. Real code running on Windows Vista. Now, in this prototype we said, what instead of showing the thumbnails, when I move my mouse to a taskbar button, we simply show you the window. So I haven't clicked yet, right? Just show you a full-size preview. So now let's look what those Notepad windows look like. Yeah, now I get a pretty good impression of Notepad, right? There's a certain size and position on the screen. There's some text in it, lorem ipsum. Now how about this guy? This one's actually on a completely different part of the screen, right? Different size. It has similar text, but it has a lowercase l. Actually, this one had an uppercase L. So this is, you know, this full-size preview really ups the kind of the success percentage of switching to the right window to almost 100%. I can actually see the window before switching to it. Now, we're pretty happy with this idea, so we thought it was a pretty good idea. So we built a prototype, we roll it out. We roll it out actually in the bigger Windows organization. Whoever wants to run it, we invite them to run it. And something surprising happened. People were telling us, you know, we really like this Bat Signal preview, you know, when I'm switching to a window, but sometimes it just pops up. So what we found is actually people sometimes just toss their mouse to the bottom of the screen. They might be typing, so they're not really aware of their mouse location. And Bat Signal will kick in, and boom, you know, they completely are disrupted in their user flow. So the Bat Signal was really great when you're in kind of a user switching flow, but it really sucked when you were not trying to switch to a window, right? All of a sudden you got dark screen, crazy stuff going on. So, you know, we liked certain aspects of the Bat Signal, but we knew we weren't quite there yet. And of course we evolved this into Arrow Peak, which is what I showed you earlier. And Arrow Peak, basically we said, you know, when I move my mouse over the icon here, we still show you thumbnails, but we show them to you side by side. They're a little bit bigger than Vista as well. You know, this is not as disruptive if it would happen by accident. And then, when I need more information, I can simply move my mouse here and get more information when I need it. You know, you're basically 100% guaranteed that you're going to be in a user switching flow, and it's your choice to provide that more information at the right time. So similar previews here, we just move them up to the next level. So you can see basically in the Windows 7 taskbar, we reshuffled some of those Windows cues. We put the icon on the top level. Then on the secondary level, where there's much more space, that's where we show the thumbnails, so they can be nice and big. We show you text there as well, again, because there's more space on the secondary level. Notice that these document titles are not clipped. There's no ... I can actually read the full title. And then, if you still need more information, we give you the Arrow Peak full-size preview to the level above that. So, what are some of the lessons that we learned from our Bat Signal experiment? Start small, right? We didn't try to solve all our goals of the desktop experience at once. We actually focused on one small detail, switching to the right window. Did a bunch of prototypes on that. You know, prototype early. in real code. You know, we were very early in the process, late 2006, early 2007, and the real code prototypes allowed us to really self-host these prototypes and use them and get these unexpected insights, such as the accidental trigger that we saw with the bat signal. And finally, iterate, right? We didn't get it right the first time. You know, we did the thumbnail taskbar, then we did the bat signal, then we did arrow peak. We gave ourselves enough time to really just try out different things and really iterate on the ideas. So let's talk about a second case study here. It's called the nub. This one is all about our jump lists. You know, we're kind of now we're in the process, in this part of the process, a little bit later in the process actually, where we've kind of settled on this design of the jump lists, and we were pretty happy with the idea of jump lists, and we actually had put already a lot of dev effort into our jump lists over several milestones, and we needed a way for the user to know about jump lists because we think that would be useful for the user, and a way for them to invoke the jump lists. And of course we did what we normally do, is basically we designed a little widget for the user to click on so they could look at the jump lists. And we were kind of struggling with that widget a little bit. We tried different locations of it. For instance, here you can see it kind of in the middle. Maybe it should go here. Maybe it should go here. You know, we did a whole bunch of these different iterations. We kind of struggling with it a little bit, and we ended up with this design. You know, and we're fairly happy with it. It's sort of, you know, we put some thought in it, right? As you can see, the arrow only shows for the window that I'm on, so you don't see arrow, 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 arrow all over your taskbar. It only shows on hover. And we made it intentionally, we made it a little bit smaller than the main button because we thought the taskbar is really about window switching. And even though we like the jump list and we think the jump list is very important, it's clearly a piece of secondary functionality to the taskbar. So we didn't want it to compete in size with the main taskbar button. So, you know, we're pretty happy with this. And we rolled this out in longitudinal usability, right? We actually rolled out our entire desktop experience throughout the process in longitudinal usability. We had 63 participants use the desktop experience for several months at home over our entire design process. And this gave us some really interesting insights. You know, one insight that we got around the nub is this one. One of our users shared with us, sometimes the taskbar buttons with the nub would irritate me. Sometimes when I hit them, they open the side arrow instead. Now, and this comment actually reflected many of our longitudinal study participants. You know, and basically this user is telling us, oh my God, those little arrow widgets, they're getting in the way of me switching to the right window, right? And that's not good. That's not good. And there was more trouble. I didn't show you this earlier, but besides jump lists at this time, you could also right-click on an icon when it's running, and we'll give you a context menu that looks like this. And you could right-click on an icon that's not running, and we'll give you a context menu that looks like this. And our longitudinal usability participants were telling us, what the hell, what's going on here, right? I don't get it. Why is there like 3 menus, and how are they different? You know, sometimes when I'm looking for a certain command, I'm bringing up one menu and I can't find it because somehow it's in a different menu. So it was just too confusing for our users. And we're like, crap, you know, we're already in like September 2008. And our beta, we released our beta earlier 2009, right? So we're well on our way in the process. We didn't expect any of these big kind of issues coming up. So we're like, you know, what should we do? Should we go and look at this nub again and somehow make it bigger, make it smaller, put it in a different position? You know, we didn't really know what to do. Well, luckily, we looked to our sites and we were reminded by our principles that I shared with you earlier, and specifically by one principle. Solve distractions and not discoverability, right? The nub, we had actually introduced the nub for discoverability reasons, partly. And clearly, the nub was turning out to be a distraction. It was really getting in the way of window switching. So, we looked at this and we're like, so what if there is no nub? What if we just use right-click, right? We just use right-click to invoke the jump lists. And somebody proposed that, and then we're thinking, oh my God, we just spent several milestones of dev time in developing these jump lists. It's actually not that straightforward of a feature. There's this huge back end to it. We're keeping track of all your files and so on and so forth. So it's a big feature, big area of investment for us. And now all of a sudden we're proposing to just sort of hide that feature, right? We're not showing you any control. The only way you would ever even be able to get to it is by right-clicking. Huge investment. Do we really want to only put that on right-click? And so luckily, the longitudinal usability not only gave us the problem, but it also gave us part of the solution. So we looked at our data again, and we found that 100% of our users, or our families rather, in the longitudinal usability study, at some point over those several months that they were using the desktop experience, actually did right-click on the taskbar. And this was a great insight for us, right? Sometimes stories go around where people say, oh, people don't know how to right-click. Right-click is an advanced user functionality. We actually found 100% of our families use right-click. And this is the piece of data that we needed to confidently say, okay, we feel okay to actually put this great feature that we have, that we put a lot of work in, to just put it on right-click, because we know people are still going to find it. And of course, that's what we did. So, like I showed you earlier, in the beta build, there is no control that indicates that there is any jump list on the taskbar. You simply right-click on the button, and it shows you the jump list. We also merged all the menus so that the delta between the different menus that exist on the taskbar, whether an application would be running or not running, is actually much smaller, and those jump lists actually look pretty similar. So what did we learn from this case study? The importance of longitudinal usability, right? I talked to you guys earlier about trying out the prototypes ourselves, right? And this really gave us some insights. And we do the typical usability studies in the lab as well, and they gave us other types of insights. But the longitudinal usability, where people use your design for several weeks, several months, if you can afford it, it really gives you great insight in more kind of long-term usage of your feature that is really, gets closer and closer to actual usage of your feature over time. So our final case study here is Arrow Shake. First I want to show you guys a prototype that we call Aladdin. Now this is another pretty early prototype from February in 2007. And at this time we're kind of interested in this whole peak idea. We were kind of thinking, wouldn't it be nice if we could have people peek at Windows and not switch to Windows, so we can actually prevent them from making a switch. And the Aladdin prototype is an example of that. So let me open up a file here. And as you can see, again, this was done by one of our developers, and we actually run it on our machines to try it. So let me run the prototype. So the idea of this prototype was, say I'm working on this picture window here in front. And now for some reason I just need to read the text that is behind my window. Wouldn't it be nice if I could just sort of glance at it without necessarily switching to the window? So what Aladdin did is, I could move my mouse over this window, start rubbing, and it would kind of float to the foreground. I got to keep, so it's kind of interesting. I rub, it goes to the foreground. Now, if I need to read like a long piece, I of course got to kind of keep rubbing and reading and rubbing and reading and rubbing and reading and so on and so forth. So we found that even though this was kind of an interesting experiment, the scenario just wasn't really there, right? There's just a lot of effort of rubbing on a window. Why not just switch? So, it was a fun experiment, but we didn't really end up pursuing it for this scenario. One thing, though, that I put us on track for is, kind of this gesture. We were kind of interested in this this rubbing gesture. And of course, what that eventually evolved in is arrow shake. The idea of arrow shake has nothing to do with Aladdin. It's a completely different scenario. But somehow that that gesture idea kind of evolved in this gesture here that allows me to minimize some of the windows. So sort of an example, I guess, of how iteration can sometimes put you on these weird trains of thoughts and kind of experiment with some of these things. Now, arrow shake, we did an early prototype for that one as well, early 2007. This one was done in April. And we put it in the usability lab. Let me show you some of the usability videos.
This window? Okay. Ooh, trippy. That's kind of cool. Ooh, I like that.
Here, and I decide I'm interested in this window.
Okay. Oh, wow. Oh, I like that. That was really cool.
You decide you want this window? I shake it again.
Get on down.
I'll come back.
Get on. That's 10 there now. Come on. I like that. I like that. Good job if y'all over there. All right. Yeah.
Now, this is what we like to see, of course, right? Now, of course, I cherry-picked these videos, so I didn't show you, the 100 participants that came into our lab and told us, oh, my God, you guys suck. But, we're happy when we're getting this kind of usability feedback on our features. And we wanted to hold on to that. So a feature is such, it's a small feature, shake a window, minimize, very small thing. These usability results that we got, this delight that we really saw in the usability study, this really prompted us to kind of hold on to that and really make sure that we actually ship that feature. So what are the lessons that we learned from Arrow Shake? Small details, We worked on a lot of complicated stuff, jump lists, taskbars, and so on and so forth. But something small, such as shaking a window or maybe a color change when you move my mouse over an icon, those small details, those can oftentimes really be the delighters. So we think it's really important to hold on to some of those delighters in your process. So how does the story end, right? Well, we don't really know yet. We don't really know if we've really achieved our goals that we set out to do so. All we know is we've gotten some beta feedback from our beta, of course, and we've gotten some reviews. And it's interesting to see that so far it's looking pretty good. Our reviews are actually using some of the language that we wanted. Things you use all the time are at your fingertips. This one from The Edge says the application jump lists make it much easier and faster to navigate Windows and work with files. Actually, this reviewer called Windows 7 Windows 2007. Kind of interesting. Manage your windows with confidence. One of the major issues I always had was finding a specific window if many were open. With the help of the new taskbar, that issue has been eliminated. Well, that's great. You are in control. Windows 7 is the first version of Windows I can recall in which a meaningful percentage of the changes involves getting out of the user's face. And finally, clean and lightweight. The look and feel reflecting some of the efficiency. Windows 7 just plain works. It works fast. It's a complete pleasure to use. And it's super clean. Well, that's exactly what we wanted to hear. So with that, I hope you enjoyed our story of how we went from Windows Vista to Windows 7 and getting a little bit of a look behind the scenes and hearing about our challenges and our solutions. And most importantly, learning about our lessons that we learned, agreeing on goals and principles, just to make it easy to deliver focused designs even with multiple fingerprints on the design and a multidisciplinary process. Start small, not trying to solve everything at once, just little problems, and iterate on them. Prototyping, early, in real code, all these different prototypes I showed you, Bat Signal, Thumbnail Taskbar, Aladdin, they all helped us in our process. And then finally, or actually the longitudinal usability was one of the most important ways that we got feedback and it helped us to make decisions about our designs. And then the small details, of course, those can often be the delighters. I hope you'll find value in applying these lessons to your design process. We'll definitely be using it in our process going forward. And with that, that's all I have. I'd like to thank you all for coming. So I'd like to invite you to come to the center and ask you any questions you might have. You can use a microphone if you want to use a microphone for that. Our web audience can hear you as well.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm sure many of us here do tech support for our families, and basically from Windows 95 through 98 XP and Vista, one of the problems has always been they can never find their documents. I mean, once it drops off the Microsoft Word's recently used list, that's it, it's gone. So you get into inane conversations like, where'd you save it? And it's always, well, in Microsoft Word. With that in mind, have you thought of some kind of a graduated UI where if you say that you're a newbie, then you get this gigantic My Documents button on the desktop or something like that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the question was how can we make it easier maybe for people to find their documents if they happen to save it outside of the My Documents folder? So one way that we addressed it, I think, in Windows 7 is by introducing jump lists. So the cool thing about jump lists is they automatically, for the Word example, they keep track of your recent files. Word doesn't have to do anything for that. You don't even have to do anything for that. It just happens. So it doesn't matter if the document is saved in My Documents on a completely different drive of your computer. It really doesn't matter where the document is. It will automatically show up in a jump list. So that is definitely one way in Windows 7 that we have aimed to a little bit address that scenario.
Thank you. One more question. What about multi-monitor? Like right now in Vista, you have to basically take the window down from maximize state and move it elsewhere or get a third-party utility, something like that. Do you have anything for Windows 7?
Yeah. So the question is around multi-monitor and our desktop experience. So we realized that there's a certain percentage of users out there that use multi-mon. It's actually not that big of a percentage. And we also realized that the multi-mon design problem is not a simple one. Right? People often tell us, well, I would like my taskbar to span across all the monitors. And somebody else would say, well, I would like to have 2 taskbars on each, one on one monitor and one on the other. And we just, this time around for Windows 7, we didn't have enough time and resources to really think through that problem in a very, very deep way. So we decided, since it's a smaller percentage of our users that actually use multi-mon, for this time around to not focus on it. But it's definitely a piece of feedback that we hear often. And maybe in future releases, we'll have the resources to actually think it through and deliver a really great experience for multi-mon.
Hi, really enjoyed your presentation, and I was glad it wasn't just a product show, but you showed some lessons.
Thank you.
I have 2 questions. I'll ask the first one and then go back to the line so that somebody else can ask. The first question is, can you tell us something about the longitudinal user study? So what kind of users? Were they experts, novice, intermediate? The reason why I'm asking this question is because in your usability studies, it seemed as though someone was showing something to someone and asking them what they thought. And in my experience, you almost always get, wow, that's great, as opposed to embedding it in the context and them using it.
Yes, yes. So the question is, what exactly is the setup of a longitudinal usability study, and how do you guys do usability testing? So the videos I showed you are those were actually not longitudinal usability sessions. Those were the more traditional ones where we invite people over to try our features in the lab. And we have different, our usability researchers would probably be able to give you much more details, but we have different setups that we use for those tests, different approaches that we take. most of the time, sometimes you use paper prototypes, sometimes we use real prototypes, and so on and so forth. And most of the time, you're right. We like to have people just use the features and as realistic as tasks as possible, and that's how we get our feedback. For the arrow shake example, since we were using a lab study that was fairly short, like 1 hour, we didn't expect people to automatically find arrow shake because we didn't introduce any UI to expose arrow shake. Chances that you're going to shake a window in a 1 hour usability session are almost zero, right? So we sort of had to do the next best thing in this particular example where we just simply showed the arrow shake feature to our users and try to get some piece of feedback there. And of course, with all our feedback, we made sure to put it in the right perspective when we present it and not to extrapolate some of these insights to too far of a state so that they kind of become meaningless. It's always important to see the results in the context. The longitudinal usability studies are different. We go to people's homes, families' homes, and we install prototypes on their machines. And we did 2 for this process, and both of them are about 2 or 3 months long. And basically, we check in with these families. So first visit, we go and install it. Second visit, we go and interview them, and we're like, what about this? What about that? Did you run in such and such here and there? And what do you think? And then there's just these multiple check-in points where we just get all these different data from these visits. So it's a different process, and it gives us more insight into long-term usage. The chances that somebody is going to find arrow shake over a 2-month period are slightly better than over a 1 hour period.
So I had a question about the thumbnail previews. One of my biggest complaints with the thumbnails in Windows 7 is that when you run out of horizontal space, it just converts into this kind of annoying vertical list. Mm-hmm. I noticed in your sketches you actually had multiple rows of thumbnails. Mm-hmm. What was your decision to actually drop that or not go in that direction?
Yeah, so the question is, if there are many thumbnails, sometimes we revert back to a Vista-style vertical list. Why didn't we explore any other design options for that? So, first of all, it's important to realize that you remember that graph that I showed? Most of our users have between 0 and 14 windows open. So most of the time, actually, for most of our users, they won't encounter kind of this state that you described, where our thumbnails become so small that we revert to the vertical list.
That was actually my follow-up question, though,
yeah.
Because the time I encounter that the most is when I have a bunch of tabs in IE. Yes. And so did that number of windows include the number of tabs they have in open in Internet Explorer?
So not for that particular graph, no. Yeah. We have data on the usage of tabs in IE as well. I don't have it available off the top of my head, but still the scrolling case is still, you're still on the far edge of that graph. Yeah. It's actually interesting because, even within Microsoft, we get data, of course, externally from people that use our products, but we also get data internally. And it's really interesting to see because I showed you kind of the cumulative graph of everybody in the world and how many windows they have open. But when you look at Microsoft internally, this graph looks completely different. And most people have actually like 20 windows open, 30 windows open, 50 windows open. So sometimes we kind of have a skewed perception, I guess, of the real world. So even I don't have the IE tabs numbers, but I'm pretty sure that this large number of tabs would be on the far end of the scale.
Yeah.
So that's not to say that it doesn't occur, of course.
Yeah, my second follow-up to that is netbooks are becoming more popular, and so it's only a handful of tabs before it converts to the vertical list. So was there any data on, new, smaller resolution machines and how that worked with netbooks and so forth?
Yeah. So on smaller resolution screens, that's a really good question. So we don't have any data that I'm aware of for those particular user scenarios. And as that segment grows, it will be interesting for us to look at that specifically and see if we need to, how we need to tweak our design to address it. Yeah.
Thanks. That's all I had.
Thank you.
Hello. Arsen Yuriman, .NET developer, power user of Windows since 3.0. About a year ago, I got myself a Mac because I felt I was missing out on the things that people were doing on the Mac. Plus, I wanted to develop for the iPhone. Since then, I've had enough time to kind of play around with it and discover lots of features that I painfully became aware of were missing in Windows, and I'm wondering, are there lists of those features that people at Microsoft look at and say, okay, well, we need that zoom and we need that tiling effect to just work the way it does on a Mac?
Yeah, I mean, so the question is, do we look at a Mac OS 10 and list the features that we think we need? So, of course, I mean, in Windows, we look at all of our competitors, right? We look at OS 10, we look at Linux, we look at all these different OSs and how they do things. Oftentimes, it's not as simple where we would say, oh my God, that's a great feature, let's do that. We more reason from our own user experience and our history that we have. Like I showed you with this long history where even, ever since Windows 1, we had a taskbar concept. So what we like to do is simply look at our own history, look at our own user models, look at our own windowing models that are actually slightly different from OS 10, for instance, and base our features on that.
I see.
Okay.
My other question was about the idea of shaking a window. The WoW responses are maybe comparable to a fancy-looking screensaver, where you might, or let's say some sort of a Windows Media Player sound indicator, right? That initially it happens the first time when you go WoW, but doesn't really add productivity value in the future. And one thing I was thinking about, well, how can you translate that gesture into something that's actually useful on an ongoing basis and adds additional productivity? And one thing that I could think of is people probably use Alt-Tab all the time to switch between windows, and that requires keyboard touch. And I was thinking there isn't really a mouse way, an easy mouse way of doing it without getting a special mouse with installing additional applications. So that's just a bit of input.
Yeah, that's a really interesting idea. We know Alt-Tab is, our keyboard users really like using Alt-Tab, the Alt-Tab twitch, and it might be an interesting exploration to see if a mouse gesture for that could be used. Yep, thanks.
Okay, my second question is, I really like the metaphors you used, especially bat signal in Aladdin, which was a very subtle sort of metaphor. Can you speak to the usefulness of these names and these metaphors in the design process?
Yeah.
Because when I tell students to use metaphors, they sort of see it as, oh, come on, that's cheesy, right? Yeah. So does it help with the design process to have these names?
So the question is, do the cheesy names help in the design process? Well, I don't know, frankly. I don't know if it helps. Maybe we're just a cheesy design team, but we just enjoyed using them. We need some sort of label to describe our features and our prototypes. And I guess we could give them numbers, or we could give them, very serious names or anything like that. For this release, for our feature areas, we decided to sort of just use these more kind of wacky prototype names. I don't think it has any impact of the design quality necessarily, but it just makes it a little bit easier and more fun, I guess, for us internally to describe our prototypes. When you say bat signal, people within Microsoft, they would know what you're talking about. It just sticks a little bit easier to remember. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it gives you an emotional connection to your ideas.
Yeah, it's fun.
So I had a question about the variations in the right-click menu off of the Start menu, where you right-click in one case and you have close, restore, minimize, and you right-click in another scenario and you have the jump list. And I think, as an outsider, it seems like it would be obvious to you guys who are living with this that would be frustrating to an end user, and it surprises me that you didn't realize that until so late in the game.
Yeah.
And I'd like some commentary on why it took testing to get to that point.
Why were we surprised by the multitude of menus and the confusion that it invoked? We try to obviously we try to preempt most problems, and we really think through all of our features quite thoroughly to try to address a lot of these issues. So many of our prototypes have a lot of thought put into them already that might avoid some of these pitfalls. Somehow this one just, we might have been aware of it at some point, and somebody might have mentioned it, but there's also a kind of a varying scale of issues. Sometimes an issue can be more severe than other times. And this issue just keep coming back and back and back and back. And it was so bad even that this was the #1 issue that came back in our longitudinal usability. So sometimes it's kind of hard to predict like what issues will go away. That might be initial kind of change that people have to get used to, and then after a while the noise kind of dies down and people are like, oh, now I like this better actually. That happens. But that didn't happen for this one here. People are like, oh, this sucks. And then a month later it's still, oh, it still sucks. And 2 months later it's still, oh, it still sucks. So then we're like, oh, no, we should probably fix that. So sometimes it's hard to predict, you know, the severity of the issues and maybe how it would develop over time. Yes.
I wanted to ask another thing. Again, coming from the context of a Mac, dealing with 2-finger swipes, 3-finger swipes, even 4-finger swipes, and those kind of input mechanisms, I'm assuming they have to be supported by Microsoft in order for the laptop vendors or computer vendors to say, okay, well, we're going to put this multi-sensing hardware into our laptops. And I'm wondering what's to be expected from Microsoft. Is that something that they'll at some point support so that laptop vendors start adding it, or is this kind of a thing, well, we don't have anybody that's using it, so we don't know that there's a demand for it, kind of an answer?
So the question is, do we plan to support multi-touch gestures? So actually in Windows 7, so I'm not the right person to talk to it, first of all. I'm not that familiar with it, but in Windows 7 we actually we implemented a touch platform, a multi-touch platform. So if people want to use gestures and multi-touch things such as zooming and panning in their applications, they can actually do that in Windows 7, so that will be available. They already do it in Windows Vista? Yeah. It will be even easier in Windows 7. Yeah, thanks.
Hey, I used OS X for about 7 years now, and I switched to Windows 7 in December. It's kind of a weird switch, but I did it, and because of the work I do. But one thing I noticed, and it's pretty pervasive in Windows 7, is that in Mac you kind of turn features on versus Windows before Windows 7 was, here's all our features, turn them off. And I noticed that's really kind of a theme in Windows 7. And did you meet a lot of resistance from developers that are internal of the organization who don't want to give up all their, spouting of the features? Here's all the things you can do versus the software kind of having an opinion. How did you deal with that internally?
So the question is around customization and how do we strike the right balance. So customization is a tricky thing. I think Windows, like you say, historically has been very customizable. And sometimes that's a good thing, and sometimes that's a bad thing. And it's not easy to see the difference sometimes. When you offer a lot of customization, sometimes it can introduce actually certain problems in the UI. All of a sudden we have a lot of states that we need to support. We kind of put the onus on the user to make the choices. It kind of gives us a little crutch to say, oh, well, the default, we know there are certain issues, but we introduce a checkbox here and the user can always change it. These arguments happen inside. And so customization has a lot of advantages because we do believe that people should be able to customize their computer the way they want them and make people as efficient as possible. But the trick is really trying to find the right customizations, I guess, and not to introduce too much customization. So in Windows 7, or definitely in the desktop experience, we really thought long and hard about where do we need customization points and where do we just spend hours and days thinking about the user scenarios, and we basically choose for the user. We're not going to put the burden on the user, and we make sure that our defaults are actually great, and we don't want most users actually to customize that stuff. So, and that's tricky, right? And we'll get feedback internally and externally. Maybe some people say, oh, I would like to turn this on, or oh, I would like to turn that off, and so on and so forth. And usually the way we deal with that is we just look into the user data, and it gives us insight into how widely shared that desire is. And if this is a widely shared desire that we think is a valuable request, we would probably implement it. If this is an edge case that in the end just makes the overall UI complicated for most of our users and just clutters up everything for everybody, we probably might not do it with that reasoning.
Okay.
So that's it. Again, I'd like to thank you all guys all for coming. Please remember to provide feedback. I think the session code is C26F. So again, thank you.